Okay. Holy shit! I'm finally doing it. Oh, my adventures. Oh, I mean, come on, people. So I live a little bit different lifestyle than a lot of people, which means I need a different vehicle to accommodate those living situations. And when I say vehicle, I also mean home. And here is my latest rendition of that. This is a 98 Subaru Outback, and I've got big plans. This is how I have had to travel recently. Let me just show you the embarrassment. We've got fishing poles, camping gear, oars, groceries over there, Dr. Bronner's, duffel bag, boots, electronics, backpack, sleeping bag, axe, another outdoor bag, tools, fishing stuff. All this comes with me often. Now I just have to empty this bad boy out, and that's the first step. And then we're gonna start tearing things apart. Hit that subscribe button for me, would you? And then also hit the little bell thing for notifications. I wanted to take you on my dreams of what this Subaru is gonna look like. This back section is gonna be my bed. It'll be in like 3 different sections. This part here, I need to have a little table that I can just pull up, so when I'm standing here, I can work on an actual raised platform. After this table raises up, I want, starting about here, I want this section to tilt up like a futon, so I can just sit here and enjoy these beautiful views. I admittedly don't have much of a plan for this thing. Just gonna kind of dive into it and see what happens. I went a little bit farther than I originally planned, but I'm glad I did. There's so much more space in here. I just want to take you on a little tour and show you the foundations of my new adventure rig. Everything is gone. I have to go get plywood, but before I do that, I need to get the dimensions of where I want these cut, because this is my only rig and I don't have a way to transport a full sheet of plywood. I have to be squished up here because the plywood's too big. But we got it all! With something like this, you're never gonna get level, per se, because everywhere you drive is gonna be different, and in here, it's very difficult to find level spots. So all you really need is flat. And the best way to do that, I've found, is to just have these long runners. Just have 2 of them. That's going to be your flat. I've just made a super, super rough mock-up, basically, of what this is. This is 2x2 material, the main frame, which is actually 1.5 by 1.5, and then just some strapping, or whatever you want to call it, across to kind of keep the shape. I went and actually bought better straight material. I'm going to go back through and reframe this with the actual decent straight stuff. This is the front, and I was able to find a flat spot here and here. It actually went all the way across. I was able to put the supports. These are the 2 2x2s together. There's 2 on both sides here. And then in the back, there's one that they're both sitting on, or that both stacks, this stack and that stack, sitting on one more 2x2 right there, because there was a flat section in the back. And then right here and right here were basically the only other flat spots that I could find. And so I just cut single pieces and screwed them on there. So this right here is how I go about trying to get these really crazy angles. So first thing that I did is I'm doing this back section. This is the rear passenger corner. What I'm actually doing here is this material here, the bottom material, I've just squared up with where I know my piece of the plywood is going to end up. I got a square edge at the bottom here, and then a square edge right there. And what I'm going to do, I have this kind of cluster right here that I have to figure out, but I also know that my plywood is only coming to this piece of wood right here. So I only have to go
24 inches. So I already have my wood pre-cut for the 24 inches. So I only have to get this figured out for 24 inches. So what I've done here is, this is my square edge that I'm coming off, and I had to trim the corner right here just to fit against this. So this is my straight edge, and what I've done is, I don't have the right tools. I know they make tools for this. I just cut the factory edges off this cardboard, and what I'm gonna do is, I mean, these aren't perfectly straight, but I just took the factory edge and laid it across this plane to get this angle, and then I did the same here. And I'm going to tape these in place, and then I'm going to use these edges to put them on my pre-cut plywood and cut from there. This is what it's going to look like finished. This is about as janky as it comes. Like I said, I don't have the right tools, and apparently the only tape I have is athletic tape. So this is the final product. I'm going to try to just keep everything in place like this. My thoughts are, if I set it back in place and all of the tape is taut, then I should get it in pretty close to what I need it. What I'm gonna do here, set it down on the plywood, trace it all out, and then come back with the jigsaw, and I'm gonna cut it pretty fat and cut it wide just to make sure that I didn't screw up anywhere, and just kind of guess and check, try to put it back in there, and if it doesn't work, I'll trim off a little bit more. So theoretically, this is how we're gonna go. I've got these two edges here and down here squared with my wood. Everything's taut, so hopefully I can just trace this, and this should give me pretty close to what I need to cut out. Do the same to the other side, and cross your fingers that this works.
Here's another important piece of advice, having done this a few times. Do not go for perfection. These are really difficult cuts. Don't go for perfection on your first try, and get it where you want it to be, and then you can go and get it gray if you want to paint it or whatever, or go back and do it with better material. The other thing too, if this is the first time you've ever lived in something this small, do not go overboard. I did that on a few things. You have no idea what you actually want until you're in here. I used to think that I wanted access to everything and all my clothes, and I wanted a lot of little cubbies. You don't actually need it. Found out all you really need is a headlamp, cell phone, and water. You're good to go. So that is one of my biggest suggestions if you're going to live or do something like this. Well, that little cardboard trick worked well enough. As you can see over here, it is in place and it made it around here. It might not be the prettiest cuts you've ever seen, but it'll work. And a quick tip, when you're doing stuff like this, I was having a little bit of an issue just getting this fit as well as I wanted to, and I was having issues with the corner that I'm sitting on here. It was binding up a little bit, so I trimmed that, and since I've done this before, I knew not to go too overboard. I was trimming it and just wasn't quite fitting right. And so here's your piece of advice. When you're doing stuff like this, check all of your corners. You might just think that you're hitting on one side, but actually I needed to come and trim this side up just a little bit. You couldn't see it from the top, but because of this angle and there was a little lip underneath there, I kept hitting on that. And I noticed when I kept trimming this corner that things were still getting very snug, and it was actually because I was binding up on the front here and in this corner. So there you are. There's your heads up tip for custom fitting these. Well, we are making progress. I just wanted to show you kind of the intermediate stage of where we're at now. This is obviously not how this is going to end up looking, but these are the plywood that I just ended up ripping. And what you can see here, these are going to be the sidewalls of my cabinets or cupboards or whatever you want to call them. I don't really know how big I'm going to go yet, but this gives me my flat surface to go off of. And so this is kind of what I mean by like try to just find flat areas, and now I can build from here. This is the wheel well, which is also where the shocks and everything are going to be. And obviously that is not a very square flat spot. So what I can do now that I have my flat is, it's not attached right now, but I can use this as my basis, and then I can go through and just frame around here. I'll use this as my flat, and then however high I decide to go, I'll just make this nice and even and get whatever storage I can out of there. I've just got, this is just a 2x2 frame and a piece of plywood on the front. And the way that I actually started out doing this is this frame here, which is just a rectangular box, I started out with basically two identical pieces, two identical squares, and I tried to make a box. And then I realized once I got to the back here that my height was too high, and I could not get the box in here. So what I ended up having to do, this was actually the top member that I ended up cutting and moving it down, just eyeballing it to wherever it was going to be flat. I was able to transfer that thought process to this side. And you can see over here, same process, just this one just doesn't have as high of an extension over here, but it's just basically an L. I just wanted a frame that I could start thinking about where I could put things. There'll be holes cut or cubbies or whatever, and areas where I can just stuff clothing or, you know, cordage, anything like that. But just to get a place where you realize, okay, this is how everything's going to lay out, that's really the important part of this step, is getting the frame ready to go, and now you can figure out, okay, where do I want to go from here? You can see with this plywood, I had to cope or cut out this little frame so that it'll fit the contour over here. I also, when I was cutting this piece, just to get it to fit, I had to rip this backside. I had to keep just running it through the table saw and trimming it until it was flat. So just know that's part of the process. This angle here, I just did a straight measurement from this corner to this corner of my framing and just cut a straight line. You could also do an arc. Here is the tabletop, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. It has the tabletop hinges on it. So this is the back section of my sleeping area, and underneath I've got the area framed out for the hinges. The hinges are mounted. Now, how I actually went about to get it squared, I cut it to length. I had an overhang. I tried to overhang both of my studs, or whatever you want to call them, by half, because I'm going to have more plywood on both sides. And then on the back here, if you can see, that piece of plywood I have clamped from the bottom, and that was so I could keep my distance. I knew where my distance was going to be, and then these right here are shims that I just slipped in. And that way, I've just found every time I make things, I just add some gaps, because especially if it's your first time through, you really never know how it's going to work. In order to get these lift top hinges mounted, I had to put a piece of plywood to actually mount this, because I needed 4 inches from top to bottom. Now that I've got these mounted here, I have everything clamped from the top. I got it positioned, and I'm going to come underneath here. I've got both clamps, both hinges here. I'm going to come and cut these off, and now I can screw these from the bottom, and theoretically that's about as good as I can get these things. So first, the key, get these in position, get these mounted, and then get your tabletop in position and mount it like this. This right here behind me, I think, is a really important process. It is basically just built out of very cheap, flimsy material, which was on purpose. And I can't emphasize how important I think this process is. Doing a mock-up like this, I've already have a list of things that I want to change and do differently. And I think that it's important to understand that you're going to get to that point, and that, I don't want to say push through, but just know, like, hey, these are things that I want to change, and just know that that's part of the process. That is working. That's why you do this. If you've never done this before, or if it's like a new build, I would just try to emphasize, plan on at least 2 steps. Your first build, do not try to get it perfect right off the bat. You're going to change a lot. You're going to want to change a lot of things, I'm going to guess. From my experience, having lived in alternative places, well, I finally got it done. At least the mock-up version of my tiny camper in the back of my Subaru. And I want to take you on a quick tour. I'll show you all the little features, including this sweet futon recliner I've got, some of the other storage, and I want to show you why this is a mock-up and not the final product, and show you how to go about doing the things that I've done, hopefully give you some tips as to avoid some of the headaches that I've had, and encourage you to just get out here and build something like this if you have the urge. Also, hit that subscribe button for me, would you? They're tiny little campers. Wonderful mother made these for me, and these are going to be the covers for the cushions that are going to be sitting in these 3 sections. 3 different cushions for 3 different sections, and let me show you why that's important. There's a few features that are in this that I need to be able to move the cushions independently. First off, here's the lift top table. I'm super excited about this, but this is why you want to do a mock-up, because this is awesome, but it's not really quite tall enough. Like, just to get in the frame, I have to squat down, but like as you can see, in order to do this, I'm gonna have to be bent down a little bit. Definitely not a big deal at all, but I would like it to be a little bit higher up here. One thing with this lift top table that I want to do is cut a hatch in it so I can access the storage underneath. So I want to put something right in here, and that way when I don't have to just use this to get underneath here. I built 2 different futon like sections in the back of this thing so that when I'm hanging out looking at the beautiful views from the back of my little camper, I can have a few different options of positions. So let me just show you what those look like. This is the first section that I've got, and here's the second bench. This here was definitely one of the more difficult parts of this build, which was the support for the futon benches. And if you can see here, what I've used is, this is a piece of all thread right here. This is a piece of all thread and a piece of angle iron with a couple of nuts on both ends. And this one, what I did for the support is I actually took another piece of angle iron. I should have gotten a better video of it, but I got another piece of angle iron and just drilled a hole through it. And can you see it here? Yeah, that's not too bad. So this angle iron, I drilled a hole, and the all thread is passed all the way through. So you can see how I've set this. The nut, there is my stop. There is how I keep my pivots in place. And then those are connected up top with very similar system. And then these I have cut at a 45-degree angle. This is something that I wanted to really bring to your attention as far as how things don't exactly go as you anticipated. So what I did here is, because this thing swings up, this thing moves up and down like this. And so this undersides here, I'll show you, they're cut at a 45-degree because I kind of anticipated the all thread rolling up and getting caught. Well, as a matter of fact, it doesn't want to move at all because the bolts are so stiff. And also, not that I think it's that big of a deal, but as you can see when I push this back, the corners of the angle dig in, which is fine. I just ended up having about 4 more spots where I can keep this futon. I've got my little shelving, which I hope is going to be where I keep some of my spices and my cooking equipment. And then behind it, for the final version, I want to have some sort of quick release, but I have some storage behind here, which has got my jack, and I'll put jumper cables and whatnot. Because I had this weird notch here and nothing's square, I was able to just rip this down, but then I had this funny corner here. And so I went through with an oscillating saw like this, or a plunge saw, trim, whatever you want to call it, and just trim and trim and trim, and then you put it in there and you see where it's hitting, and you trim and trim and trim again. And now that I have this, these are a pretty good template for my final product. This is why the mock-up is so important. I just put the plywood on here, and as janky as it may seem, I just had it screwed on there, and I just ran the circular saw right down both and put the hinges on. And then this latch is just a piece of aluminum angle iron, or I guess it's not angle iron if it's aluminum, but I just was able to cut part of this off and just put a little swivel tab. Here's another area where the mock-up is important, and to fasten these 2 sides was kind of a challenge, and I wasn't able to get anything from the inside to fasten it with, at least once I got to this point. So as you can see here, I just took some of that same aluminum angle and drilled some holes in there and just fastened it from the outside, which, you know, I had to come back through. This is my lift top table, and just cut this out so that everything would lay flush. And that's totally fine. I don't mind. But, you know, in the future, on the next step, you know, these are some of the things that you got to consider, that I have to consider before doing this, is how am I going to attach all of this to itself. So if you notice on this side of the camper, my storage isn't nearly as tall as it is on the driver's side. And the reason for that is simply so I can still see out of this window. And for this, I just did a lift top storage because, well, it's not nearly as tall. And if you can tell that I have a funny overhang right here that goes over the water, because this was an afterthought that I had, but I decided to cut this the same length as the length in between here. And if you can tell, I have some funny ends. These 45s cut on both ends. And the point of this being, eventually, I'll have this receiver mounted right here on both sides so that I can take this off. They'll slide right in between, and I'll have a sweet little desk that I can work on. Multi-purpose dispensing spigot, and you can see here, this has got a downspout that comes out. So just like normal. This is a 5-gallon. They come, I think, in a 2.5. And then here, this is how you release the pressure so it actually goes, is you've got this handle here, and you can just Velcro it. So this I'm really excited about. This is going to be my sink, my water dispenser. So here we are looking at one of the back sections between the middle and the back section. And I just wanted to point out some of the stuff that is far from perfect and pretty on this, so that you guys, you know, maybe feel a little bit inspired as to, like, you know, just remembering this is the mock-up. And, like, you know, there's stuff like this is a big old gap and between these two, because this hinges up and you need special hinges, not necessarily special, but the right type of hinges that actually mount to the top of this if you want to have these gaps not flush, or I mean, if you want these gaps flush. And the reason is because these are undermounted hinges. And when I open this section, this is going to pivot like this. And the top of the board is actually going to roll forward. And you can see here, I'll try to do it without shaking too much. You can see here, it gets closer. And if it's too close, then it is going to run into the other board and basically break or destroy the other board. So if you want it all the way up like this, you can see the gap is pretty much gone. And so the reason I've done this is because these hinges that I have on here are way, way, way less expensive. I think it's really important to get to a place that you're 80% happy with how it's going to go, and then go use it. And I know that might not be appealing to a lot of people, but I promise you're going to be much happier with it in the end if you go through with this and take it on a trip and see how it goes. Holy shit! I'm finally doing it. Oh my gosh. So I'm sitting here above Santa Barbara right now and just absolutely loving this rig and loving life right now. This is my, I think, 3rd day in this, but the first 2 have just been travel, and I did sleep in this, and this definitely isn't finished, but holy crap, guys, this is so awesome. This is my view. This is pretty epic, folks. Just thought you should see this. I've gone on a long wander, and it's ended me here, which I gotta say, for the first time in my life, I feel like is a pretty good place. And I just want to show you that this, if you don't feel like the normal way of life, the cookie cutter way of life is the way of doing it, I very much encourage you to follow that urge, because I spent such a long time fighting that and trying to figure out the life and all this. Just know, it's not just all about what everyone else thinks is the way you should live your life. Just figure out what you want to do and don't be afraid to chase it, because it took me a really long time to figure that out, and it took me years and a quarter-life crisis and all of that very uncomfortable stuff just to realize I'm doing what I've been missing out on. Why I was unhappy for such a long time is because I wanted to be able to do this. I wanted to be able to take long vacations. I tell you what, this is a face of pure joy. Pure fucking joy. And I got my little adventure rig here, and my adventures! Oh, I mean, come on, people. It's not that bad.